Hey everyone, this is Amanda Moore from the Angelman Syndrome Foundation, and you're listening to the ASF podcast, the show that explains everything you want to know about Angelman syndrome. We're so excited you're here, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Well, welcome everyone to the Angelman podcast. I'm incredibly excited today because typically I am interviewing doctors, clinicians, other parents, which is amazing, but I'm really excited today for our awesome guest, Angie Kim, who is with us, who is a New York Best Time Sellers author. Her book that we're going to talk about today is part of People Magazine's Book of the Week. And the reason why this is important to us is because it's one of the first books we know out there that one of the characters actually has Angelman syndrome. So Angie, thank you so much and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited for this podcast. My entire team is on tenterhooks.
I love it.
And they can't wait to hear all about this because they are fascinated with Angelman syndrome. And that's one of the big things that my editor and my agent and everybody, when I showed them this book for the first time, they were like, "What is Angelman syndrome? Did you make that up?" And I said, "No, it's a real thing. Go Google it." So I'm so excited.
Well, I will tell you, I came across it because the word started getting out within our community. And once one person knows about it in our community, it spreads like wildflowers. And so everyone is just on pens and needles for this book to come out. And I will tell you, I feel very special because I got a quick advanced copy that I got to read and I cannot wait to dig into it. But I think first and foremost, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the community and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am. So my name is Angie. I live in the Northern Virginia area outside DC. I'm a Korean immigrant. I came to the US from Seoul, South Korea when I was 11. And I came here not speaking any English, and that had a huge, profound impact on me that I know we're going to get to talk about. But just to go along with my bio a little bit, I became a lawyer first and foremost.
Okay.
So I was a litigator for a while in my 20s, to realize I hated that, and then moved to the business world with management consulting at McKinsey. And then I was a .com entrepreneur during the whole 90s craze.
Oh, wow.
And then I was a stay-at-home mom because I had my first child in 2001. So he's like 21 now. And I can't believe it.
Right.
I have 3 boys and they all had medical issues. Okay. As babies. So one was born with auditory neuropathy, which is a form of hearing loss. Lots and lots of digestive issues, some of which I write about, ulcerative colitis. That was really, really hard to deal with, and celiac disease, really awful food allergies. One was diagnosed with a kind of microcephaly when he was little, but we think that it's just the shape of his head is what neurologists have come to conclude. But so many different things that were, that when they were little, and they're all fine now. And when I was in my 40s and about 10 years into being a stay-at-home mom, I decided to start writing for the first time in my life, just dealing with all of the medical stress, the frustration of dealing with the insurance companies, which I know all the families know so much about probably. Mm-hmm. And, so I thought maybe I would write like a how-to guide on how I dealt with it, especially with the insurance company and, medical diagnoses and all of that sort of stuff. Sometimes it can be such, it can feel like a huge project in and of itself.
Absolutely.
And so I started doing that, but then I started just writing about the feelings that I had for the first time. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, this is so freeing. And I felt like I was jumping from one career to another, looking for something that fulfilled me.
Mm-hmm.
happy on a day-to-day basis, but also that made me feel like I was doing important work. And I feel like for the first time I had found that with creative writing. And then my husband, who's the lawyer, also said, honey, you're writing about our family, and it's not just your story, it's our family story too. And the kids are really little. We don't know what the ramifications are going to be for insurance and, all of medical privacy. So he said, why not try writing fiction? And I was like, fiction? And so I did. And my first novel, so I turned to fiction, fell in love with it, fell in love with writing short stories. And this family that's in Happiness Falls is actually one of the first short stories I ever wrote and published back in 2013. And it won a writing prize. And at that time, I didn't know about Angelman syndrome. So Eugene, who is in Happiness Falls, is the 14-year-old teenage son with Angelman syndrome and autism, a dual diagnosis of mosaic Angelman syndrome and autism. At that time in that story, I described him as being autistic and non-speaking because that's what we, that's what the family thought. And that's what I thought at the time.
Yeah. What I love is it seems like just from the short intro that you just did, that you have a lot of yourself and your family written within these characters in this book. I mean, it seems like just even the themes of, coming and not knowing English and feeling like no one understands you. And that's really kind of relates back to with the whole theme of the story when we talk about communication with Eugene, of being able, like, stuck in the head of like trying to get this out. And it seems like you've taken a lot of your personal experiences and wrapped them up into this family.
Absolutely. I feel like because I did have some experience myself, even though it's not particularly with the particular conditions that I describe in some of my novels, because I have that experience of being an outsider in this country with respect to language, with respect to culture, and feeling like you're lost and you're kind of trying to find your people and trying to find connection. I feel like that's just the through line in all of my stories and the two novels now that I have, because that's just so important to me. And it's something that I struggled with for so long. And it's something that even after I kind of mastered, because I did learn English, within a few years and all of that sort of stuff. And I learned what clothes were cool and would not get me teased. And, in middle school, which was such a hard time to be coming over to.
Oh, gosh, right. I can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine.
It was horrible. So, but even then, later as a mom, longing for that quote unquote normalcy, seeing the other kids in preschool and seeing how easily they were able to play and do all of these things that, my oldest couldn't do because he had some of these issues, some of which were undiagnosed at the time. And, just feeling kind of sorry for myself and feeling like life is unfair and wondering why this was happening and really longing to be quote unquote normal, longing to be typical, longing for my child to be accepted. And I think that's just had a profound impact on me. And I think that no matter what story I write, that is just going to be something that's at the heart of it, at the core of it.
I think that's so beautiful because everything you just said is, as a mom myself with a son with Angelman, I mean, that's what it is, right? You're longing for, you're told so much that your child is not neurotypical or that, doesn't fit into the mold, and you have to go to IEP meetings. You have to do all these things that are different than your typical. I hate to use the word typical, but I get it. It's a different journey and a different path, and it can feel so lonely and isolating. So finding your community is incredibly important. And, I'm curious, what brought you into the world of Angelman? And I think it's important for everyone who's listening to know that the character Eugene in this book is the first diagnosis is autism, and then the second is Angelman. It's mosaic, and I think it's really important to understand that there's 4 types of genotypes, and mosaic is a very rare type of Angelman. And so I'm curious of what brought you into the world of Angelman.
Yeah, I really feel like I'm not one of these people who believes in fate or kismet or things like that until I got to writing this book. I don't know what it is, but there are so many things about this book that have just landed in exactly the right way. So I always knew that this character, Eugene, so first, a little intro into the family who's at the heart of Happiness Falls. So the story is about a biracial Korean-American family that's thrown into crisis when the father goes missing. And it's at the beginning of the pandemic. He went on a walk, kind of they call it a hike, but it's just, a slow, leisurely stroll to the nearby park. And it's a stay-at-home dad, and he went there with Eugene, who's the 14-year-old, with this dual diagnosis, and only Eugene returns home, which is very unusual, obviously.
Very. When I read that part, I'm like, I could never imagine Jackson making it home, but how terrified I would have been in that situation, right?
Right, absolutely. It's so unusual that the sibling, who's our narrator, 20-year-old Mia, she's one of fraternal twins, Mia and John, who are home from college because of the pandemic. And she's very overly intellectual. She's an overthinker.
Very much.
She's she's hyperlexic. And
but
for those of you who know the nomenclature, you know what that can entail.
Yes.
I love her too. And she can be a little bit annoying, especially to her family. But it's so inconceivable to her that he would have been home alone, that she thinks that she just missed seeing the dad, or she doesn't even think about it. Like, of course, dad's around. Maybe he's just right around the block and he just, is taking videos or whatever. And she falls asleep and doesn't even realize that the father is missing until later in the day, when the mom and her brother come home and are like, where's dad? And why is Eugene, jumping in his room, which is what he does for sensory relief when he is really, really stressed out. And he's been doing that for several hours. And so that sets everything in motion. So Eugene, who's 14, I had always thought of him as autistic because that's what he was back in Korea. So the family lived in Korea. Eugene was actually born in Korea. And Korea is not the most accepting when it comes to any kind of what they consider a psychological or neurological kind of condition. And so in Korea, I think the refrigerator mother theory of autism, which is that, autism is caused by cold mothers who don't love their children,
right,
is something that is actually still discussed seriously to this day. So anyway, so he was born over there. He didn't speak. And because he was bilingual, they didn't really think that much of him being a late speaker. But he's not speaking as of the time he's like 3 years old. So they, he gets diagnosed with autism. And then, so that's how I was writing him. And what happened was, as I was writing this book, I love this family so much because they love Eugene so much, and he's such a wonderful character. I just love him. But because of that sibling rivalry dynamic, and because Mia and John are twins anyway, so they've always felt like, they've never gotten that individualized attention anyway, they feel like. And then here comes along this, this kid who takes up all of the family's bandwidth as far as therapies and money and all of that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of resentment, but so much love. So it's very complicated. And so Eugene, I was writing about this family, and I was looking up in Soma I don't know if you know of Soma, who does
Hmm.
RPM, she really revolutionized the spelling therapy known as RPM. And I was looking her up in Austin because I was on book tour there and I wanted to try to go visit her and, and see some of the non-speakers who are learning to spell at work
Yeah.
with the person who sort of started the whole thing. And when I looked on her website, I saw that there was somebody on her board who's head of a local Angelman foundation. And I
Oh,
what is Angelman? That is such an unusual word, or something that I've never. So I just Googled it, and then I saw the description. I think it was the Angelman syndrome
yeah. Yeah.
website. I'm sure it was. It would have been the first hit. It's on my resources guide in my website, and it's something that I discussed in my author's note as well. And I saw it, and I just got chills because I had always seen Eugene in my mind
Mm,
with this smile, this joyful smile that's persistent. And I didn't know where that came from. I knew that it wasn't always because he was happy, and that's one of the things that, gives rise to the name Happiness Falls, is that
yeah.
dad's really, really obsessed with theories of happiness. But I didn't really make the connection. I didn't know why I knew that the dad was obsessed with happiness. I just knew that he was.
Yeah.
Maybe because I have been,
Yeah.
and I didn't know why I saw Eugene with a smile. And I didn't know why motor difficulties being such an issue for him was such a huge thing. Of course, it is for a lot of kids with autism too, but even
Sure.
than, a lot of people, I knew that he was having trouble with jumping and running and all of these things that a lot of autistic kids I know can do pretty easily. And so I didn't know why I saw it. I just thought that was just, the depiction I had of the character in my mind. And so when I read the description, I was like, this is Eugene. This is
Yeah.
Eugene. This is, I don't know how. And I also really loved that there was a genetic component in that this family is a very scientific family.
Yes.
The narrator is kind of a science geek, and she loves thinking, and she was thinking a lot about the genetic differences between her and her twin, and how
Hmm.
many, what percentage of their genes are alike versus different. So I had already written those riffs that she had already done on genetics. And so this was like a gift. And I just thought, I want to learn so much more about this. And then I got to meet so many people in the community. And then I just kind of really wanted to, even apart from the characterization, just bring light to this community, because I think it's so little known and I think it deserves more attention.
Well, I tell you, I'm obviously, as a mom and the CEO of the foundation, that makes my heart incredibly happy. And, when we talk about this family, as I was reading it, I was underlining and starring, and because there's so many themes that so much resonated with myself and our family, but also with what I hear within the community. And I think you did a fantastic job of really kind of, raising up the themes that our families, and a lot of families who are raising a child with any sort of diverse need, struggle and deal with. So I think anyone who reads this book, it doesn't have to be someone who has a child with Angelman or on the spectrum. I think anyone who has a child with any sort of diverse need is going to understand the dynamics and the themes of this book. And I think that's why I so much appreciated it. As I was reading it, I could see Mia was Baden, Jackson's, so Jackson's a twin, by the way. And so I
didn't know that.
Yeah. So Baden doesn't have Angelman syndrome and Jackson does. But the whole time there, I was thinking, and also the dynamic of the mom and dad, that the mom, the dad was the working, brought in the money, was working and going. And the mom, I have to say, I'm just going to bring up some actual quotes because I think this is important. There was a part about the mom became consumed by theories, therapists, specialists, conference, etc., and that any good mother would have gotten started in speech therapy sooner. These are thoughts that were going through the mom's head. And I know as a mom, those are thoughts that go through my head on a daily basis. If I would have just done this, or is it my fault Jackson has Angelman syndrome? Like, did I do that? And you touch on all those themes so beautifully. So I'm, when it comes from like the mom perspective, and then it kind of switches to where the dad is the stay at home and he's dealing with all of these feelings now too, right? Like I failed my son because I can't get him to, I can't get him to talk to me. I failed in this way. And then to wrap it up into this thriller, right? Like to where there's a surprise shock towards the end, and like, it's so cool. But I'm curious, I'm trying to understand the themes of the first, the mom and dad, because I think that's really important unit of, how they feel, but then how their marriage kind of evolves through that those struggles as well. Those are all things that we deal with as a community. So tell me more about, like, is this something that was more personal that you saw, that you were a part of as well? Or did you hear it from the community? I'm just curious of how you got those themes nailed down so well.
Absolutely. I definitely have gone through all of these feelings. And I was, I was a stay-at-home mom, as I said, for, just by myself. I mean, my husband was obviously there, and I want to give credit to him. He did an amazing job. But when you're the primary caregiver and everything falls on you, it is so hard. And there's so much resentment. There's so much, blame, self-blame. Why didn't I do this? I wonder if it's because of this thing that I drank or ate or didn't drink or didn't eat or whatever, that, this happened, and looking and becoming obsessed with looking up articles that assign blame to some part of the gene, or, like all of these things. I remember there was this one particular time when my youngest son was diagnosed at some point with microcephaly, and also and possibly neurofibromatosis. And, and looking those up and sort of seeing, is this more, are the genetic anomalies and the mutations, are those caused by the mom's side versus the dad's side? Like, it doesn't even matter. It's
right.
But still, you sort of go through all of these what ifs. So there was a lot of that in there. There was also a lot of just the dynamics of the stay-at-home father versus the stay-at-home mom.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? So in this book, the mom they switch when they almost go through a divorce, which comes from a particular incident where there's a divergence in beliefs, let's just put it that way, of therapy that the mom tries that the dad clearly doesn't believe in and doesn't support, which I've seen happen definitely.
Absolutely.
With my friends. And so I have a lot of friends in the autism world as well, so I've definitely gotten a lot of this from them as well. But at some point in my real life, my husband and I did switch kind of sides. Not switch, but I started writing.
Yeah.
And he retired, quote unquote retired. I have a riff in the book about that too.
Yes, you do. I love it.
when guys stayed home, it's called early retirement. Yeah. When moms do, it's called becoming a stay-at-home
mom. Yep.
And
I love that.
But my husband did, and he does all of our cooking and grocery shopping and all of that sort of stuff. So, so there is some of that in there too. And and he gets overwhelmed, of course, as, I used to get overwhelmed. And it did make me think, usually when we read missing person stories, they're about women and girls.
Yeah.
And when they involve a stay-at-home mom, one of the things that people always say is, oh, I wonder if the mom just went kind of a little crazy because she was so overwhelmed. You know how those stay-at-home moms can be. And I
Right.
just sort of thought, I wonder what the dynamic is if it's a stay-at-home dad,
Yeah.
what people will say. And so, yeah,
Well,
so
and it's interesting
that's
because you have that theme, those kind of inner conversations of why the dad may have done this, or whatever. I'm not going to give away a lot. I want people to read it,
yeah.
but you do, like, it is very interesting the way that the family thinks or feels what happened versus, what the dad may have been thinking, and all of that kind of plays into it, which is very interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I really wanted to play with those themes and really interrogate this from kind of a feminist perspective,
Yeah.
why we treat the stay-at-home parents so differently based on gender and all of that sort of stuff too.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I loved that. And I think that, we have so many amazing parents, period, within our community that are, making career changes and life changes based on the diagnosis. And I mean, I know from my own, perspective that when the word Angelman syndrome came into our family, everything changed for our family, both in a terrifying way, but both in like this beautiful way to where if Jackson never was diagnosed with Angelman syndrome, we would have never been exposed to what we're exposed to, and the lessons that he teaches us about equality and love and joy. And like, there's just something, such amazing about him. And I've completely changed careers. I was doing something for 20 years and now I'm running a foundation, for my son with a rare disease. So, I mean, it is one of those things where you see that in the book, to where these parents really dive into, Eugene, and trying to give him a voice, trying to give him the best life as possible. But with that, I think one of the themes that's really important in this book, and I want to talk about, is, the narrator is the sister, Mia, and her twin brother, John. And the one thing that we as a community just recently started really talking and focusing about is siblings. Because what you did bring up in the book so well is this theme about siblings. Yeah. And there's a, particular instance in the book to where John and Mia are having this conversation are preparing for, like their yearly celebration of their birthday and what their families used to do. And they overhear a conversation of their parents talking about how extremely exhausted they are because, they've been going to therapies and doing all this stuff. And so the siblings themselves, they didn't know that they heard that, like the parents didn't know they heard this conversation. So they went in and said, you know what, we just want a cake for our birthday. That's all we want this year, to try to take the burden off of them.
Yeah.
And then what happens, I'll let people read what actually happens, but I think there's this empathy that our siblings feel, but also sometimes it comes out in real anger towards the loved one with the diverse need, whatever it may be. But in this instance, it's Eugene. And I know for Baden, he's only 8 years old and he's had some big emotions with his brother, both very positive and both very negative and frustrated. And I think you bring up these themes really well throughout me and John's, journey from being young to being in a situation now to where they are fiercely protecting their Eugene, right? Like fiercely.
Yeah.
And I just love that. I know I wrote down some quotes about in the book about the sibling part of it, but I'm just curious once again. I think it's such an important theme for anyone to read within the community, because we need to make sure that our siblings don't feel that way. Even though as parents, it's going to happen and we can't beat ourselves up and we have to give ourselves grace, but being aware of it is so important.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought this up because actually I did an NPR interview with Scott Simon for the weekend edition that just ran this past weekend. And that's a passage from the cake incident. They call it. In the book is actually the passage that he asked me to read.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I read it on NPR. And so I'll send you the link, and so you can maybe put it in the show notes or something.
Absolutely.
For people. But it is, and it's kind of a hard thing to hear, because she's brutally honest. That is the thing. She's a first person narrator. She is talking to us directly. So she's addressing us, the reader, in an intimate way. And she says things, she confesses things to us.
Sure.
In a way that she would never say out loud, even to her family, even to John, her, twin. And one thing that she does say, though, that I will ask everybody to keep in mind, because I said similar things with respect to parents in my first book, Miracle Creek. And this book is more focused on the sibling relationships. And so I call them they're not at all related, the storylines, but I think Miracle Creek, my first one, is more focused on motherhood and what it's like to parent. And this one is, from the sibling. So it focuses more on that. So it's the flip side of the coin, if you will. But I think one thing that Mia points out is that we all have these thoughts all the time, no matter who our siblings are. And I actually don't know for a fact, because I'm an only child. So I've been fascinated with sibling relationships, and my husband is too, weirdly. And, but we have 3 boys. So we see this go on, and I find it fascinating. So I'm kind of always analyzing it and scrutinizing. But I think everybody says things like, I hate you so much, and maybe even feels it a tiny bit to their siblings, no matter who they are. And we as mothers feel that way toward our families sometimes. Our, husbands, our kids, whatever, and fantasize about, having remained single and being off on some tropical island with no.
I have never felt that way. What are you talking about?
Right. And I think that when you feel that toward so-called, typical or neurotypical kids or siblings or whatever, then you feel shame, of course, but you feel embarrassment when the moment is over. But certainly there isn't the intense, like, wow, I'm an immoral, awful person for having thought that or said that, the way that there is when it comes to somebody who's disabled, a kid or a sibling with needs that are atypical, And so I think Mia recognizes that, and she says that. She was like, I don't know, I feel like I say stuff like this and think about it with John all the time, and nothing of it. But when she felt it, when she felt this like hatred toward Eugene when she was 13, she was so little, she still feels so much shame and anger toward herself. 7 years later, she's 20 now, and she's still thinking about it and really upset with herself.
Hey guys, it's Amanda here. As you know, we're here for you, our community. If you have questions about any topics we can discuss in our podcast, or if you have ideas for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. All you need to do is email me at dearamanda@angelman.org. Thank you so much for listening and your continued support of the Angelman Syndrome Foundation.
What struck me too, reading this, was thinking about, one of my fears, obviously, as a parent, is when the boys get older, one, will I have a place for Jackson? Will he be happy, healthy, safe, and loved? And will Baden not have to feel like he has to carry the burden moving forward? He would never say Jackson's a burden. We don't say Jackson is a burden, but it is not a life that he signed up for, to be an older brother taking care of his older brother, right? And so there is that fear of, and I think that once again, the themes just resonated so much with me, and I know it will with our community right now, because we are all so terrified that we are screwing up the siblings because we're not able. I mean, even in the cake scene, like, if I remember correctly, when something happens, both parents rush towards helping Eugene, and then the actual person who is, hurt or affected is kind of left, and so I think once again, as parents, we don't love that child any less, right?
No,
it's just it's like that constant like fear and terrifying that, well, we have to go fix this situation, then we'll come back to and so I love that theme.
It's triage, right?
It is.
And
there's a great way to put it.
You don't, it's not that you don't care, but you depend on them a little more, the typical kids, the quote unquote typical kids, a little more to take care of things on their own, even when they're little. Like, Mia has a footnote. And by the way, for people who don't like footnotes, you don't have to read them, but I think that they're some of my favorite.
Yeah, they're great.
In there. And Mia, and this is one reason possibly to maybe get a physical book rather than an ebook, just because I do think the ebook makes it a little bit harder to
read. That's good to know. That's good to know.
But just because you have to like click on it and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things she talks about is one of her proudest memories is when she's like 8 or 9 or something. The parents sort of sitting her down and saying, okay, well, Eugene has this diagnosis. That means a lot more we're going to have to focus on. So we're going to depend on you to do a lot more, like yourself, like no more nagging about homework and all that kind of stuff. And she's so proud. She's like, yes, I'm big. I'm like, I can do all this myself. So great that my parents aren't going to nag me about stuff. Treat me like a baby. But then she confesses, but then sometimes there was times when I wouldn't know what to think or do, and I wanted to go to my parents and ask for help, but I didn't want to, because I thought of how proud my parents are that I can do stuff on my own. It just breaks your heart a little. Oh my God, I'm like tearing up.
I know. I just think of Baden thinking that, right? And the other couple of things, and then I'll move on for siblings because I could talk about it all day, but there's a couple of parts in the book where people use just really harmful words that us as family, people in the community hate hearing. But Mia talks about how she took the responsibility of teaching others why those words were hurtful, which I think that's one thing that the siblings of our individuals with Angelman syndrome have this ability to really educate at any level. Like Baden, on February 15th, which is International Angelman Day, he went to school and they were all talking in like the circle, and he raised his hand and asked the teacher if he could share something. And he said, today's the, Angelman Day. My brother has Angelman. He's 7 years old when you did this. And so the teacher was like, well, tell me about Angelman. So he told them about Angelman. And the way he basically described it was, Jackson just is a little different from all of us, but that doesn't mean anything. Everyone in the world is different. And he just made this beautiful, like, declaration about, he explained Angelman and Jackson way better than I will ever be able to explain, but he was 7. So I love that theme came across. And then really there was a theme of being the protector 1 minute and then being so angry the minute later and always feeling left behind. All those themes, I think, with siblings were so important. So I appreciate that this book highlights that, because I think it also will be a really great way for families to once again be reminded, but also, for the book club, which I'll talk about at the end, it'll be a great way for us as families to talk about this and how we are helping our siblings and our loved ones through this, because I think it takes a village. And the one thing we do at our conference is we have sib shops. So the last conference we had, there was over 60 siblings every single day that came and just hung out with each other and learned that they weren't the only ones going through this. And it was beautiful. So I think that was really great that you brought that up.
And Mia talks about that they connect with other siblings. And it's less Mia. She's talking about John, who's much more the connected, the loving one, who actually works at the therapy center and
which I love
stuff, and wants to possibly become a social worker or maybe a psychologist. And Mia is like not really having any of it in the beginning of the book, but then towards the end, she becomes a little, fireball of total wanting to protect. And when people make assumptions about Eugene, like calling him nonverbal versus non-speaking, she gets very upset and indignant about that, and
which I love. I mean, it's great, right? So a couple other themes just for my listeners to know that you will hear in this book that really spoke to me is one, a lot of the first part of the book is just talking about routine. One of the quotes is that I think Mia says is, we are a family that depends on routine. And that speaks so loudly to our lives. If we get off routine, we all kind of pay for it a little bit, including Sweet Jackson. So I thought that was really good. There's a section about the fear of CPS being called on you. And we hear that a lot within our community as well. There's a theme around dual diagnosis, which is, a lot of our families right now, their first diagnosis will actually be Angelman, but they kind of fight for the other diagnosis as of autism because more services come with those if you have that diagnosis. Right. So absolutely. And then a couple other things, and then I really want to get into communication because that's the theme of this book. And so one thing I really loved was, I think Mia said this. She says, we are all stressed and freaked out, and Eugene is reacting to that. Yeah. And I think that's so true as well, that our kids are so much smarter than we give them credit for, and they're so observant. And when our family is stressed or if we are reacting some way to a situation, Jackson feels it and he reacts to that. I loved that. And then one more theme, and then I'll let you talk. But
no, you keep talking.
What I loved about Mia and her dad was they are very methodical and scientific. So part of the theme of this book is this idea that the dad was working on called a happiness. Is it happiness quotation or happiness quotient or happiness
quotient?
That's what I thought. He was going through and really doing almost trials, like these mini research studies, which really speaks very loudly to our community because we're all, we have so much going into research. We have so much, and we think through this, but we have a lot of clinical trials happening right now. And one of the things that you mentioned, I think Mia and her family at one point were talking about Eugene participating in a study.
Yes.
And what was in the book was talking about considering Eugene for a study. Mia thought, what is the question to think about? If you can fix a disability, why wouldn't you? And then I think the dad says, if we want our kids to be happy, if being happy is a human goal, why do we want to fix Angelman syndrome gene if part of that is being happiness?
Yes.
And then the other part was, is it fair to Eugene to do this without his consent? And I thought those were all three really important things when we think about, this idea of the different ways that we therapeutically can rescue the UBE3A that's missing, or help to rescue any sort of maybe the symptomatics. I think all the time of when an option of putting Jackson in a trial may come, it's really hard because I will be making that decision for him.
Right.
That's how I feel, right? That he can't really consent to that. So anyway, that's a lot of themes I just threw at you, but those were all amazing.
The happiness one in particular, I think for me, I think I've been obsessed with ideas about happiness for so long because again, going back to my immigration experience, when I was a child in Korea, we were so poor. We lived in one room with no indoor plumbing. We didn't take showers or baths because we didn't have really that kind of water. We went to a public bathhouse once a month if we could afford it, that kind of thing. And so coming to America was like winning the lottery. Getting that family visa through my aunt and uncle who were here. My aunt was an RN at Johns Hopkins. And so we came to the Baltimore area, and their house was like, I had my own bedroom for the first time in my life.
And running water.
And running water,
Yeah.
exactly. A shower, toilets. I had never even seen a toilet. So all of these things that I had never experienced, and it was supposed to be like a dream come true. And that's what everybody kept on saying, like, this is a dream come true. We're so happy. And yet I lost my parents in the process, because my parents, I mean, I didn't actually lose them, but we used to be together all the time, especially my mom and me. And because she was a stay-at-home mom, and they went to work at a grocery store in a dangerous part of downtown Baltimore with thick bulletproof glass in a neighborhood that was so dangerous they didn't want me to come visit them ever. And their hours were so long that the only way they could get some sleep is to sleep in the store itself.
Oh, wow.
Like a tiny storage cupboard in the back. So I basically never saw them. And so between that and losing all of my friends and feeling stupid because I couldn't speak English, I just lost everything that I thought was important. And I became miserable. And in my debut novel, there's a family kind of like this. And the teenage daughter really longs to go back home to Korea. And that was basically me. That's basically our family story. And so I've thought a lot about happiness and sort of objective versus subjective feelings of happiness. And I remember when I was doing research on this novel, I didn't even think about Eugene and Angelman and happiness issues. I just thought, I was just so excited that he looked, the way that I pictured Eugene in my mind always. And then I was reading about some of the genetic quote unquote fixes and some of the trials that, people were talking about. And I read this really interesting article, I think it was in Psychology Today, about why do we want, people are questioning whether we really want to do this, because the Angelman kids look so happy. And so if they're happy and they're laughing and they're smiling, isn't that better than the typical stressed out teenage kid that you have, who are like the rates of suicide, depression, antidepressants are at an all-time high. Why would we want to fix happiness? And I thought, this is so interesting. I hadn't thought about this. But of course, this father is obsessed with happiness theory. He has a son that people refer, with a syndrome that some people sometimes refer to as the quote unquote happiness syndrome.
Yeah.
And I just thought, this is so interesting. And so some of the passages that the father writes in the book are about sort of micro versus macro happiness, subjective versus objective happiness, and trying to figure out how to make John and Mia, who are stressed out, and Mia especially doesn't seem particularly happy, a little happier and the quotient refers to a concept where to sort of measure a person's happiness level, you sort of divide what you're feeling by the expectations or the baseline of your life. So if you lower the expectations, then maybe you'll actually be happier, that kind of thing. And so that's what a lot of the experiments are about. But with respect to Angelman in particular, I just thought it was such an interesting question to ask. And even if you're happy at the micro level, like hedonistically happy and just in a good mood and, ice cream and eating bonbons, watching your favorite TV all day, at a macro level, if you step back, is that the kind of life that you would want for yourself and for your child? And the father asks that. He says, yes, Eugene seems really, really happy on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment kind of micro way. But at a macro level, he's mosaic. He doesn't have seizures, for example. But a lot of Angelman kids do have seizures.
Yeah.
He does have gastrointestinal issues. A
lot of anxiety.
And maybe the smiling is to mask and cover up shame and embarrassment and anxiety, the shame of being treated as if you're a baby when you are not, like, and that you don't have any thoughts when you do, like all of these things. And so he really thinks about that and thinks about what happiness truly means. And I think a lot of that is, trying to figure out, should he be doing this?
Yeah. I love that because I think you bring up a good point. Like I'm told all the time, Jackson's such a happy kid. Like, but in reality, he struggles a lot. And, he does deal with things that are, traumatic and hard. And he's the most resilient kid. These kids are the most resilient kids we know. And what I like about this book too is you finally, like, towards the end, I won't give a lot away, but you finally start hearing from Eugene. And what you do realize is that there is some frustration and that he does have a voice and that he's working really, really hard to try to communicate. And I think it's a really good question for the dad to be thinking about, because a lot, I think there is this idea of, I think you probably saw this in your research, but Angelman used to actually be called the happy puppet syndrome, which praise God, they changed that name.
I know. But I thought about putting that in and I just decided, no, it's just too.
So I'm so glad it's because it's rough, but a lot of people see it that way. So, I only have a few more minutes with you. I could talk to you all day, but a big theme of this book revolves around the way of trying to find a voice, trying to give Eugene a voice and whatever that looks like. So, going through the different therapies, that's where some of the tension between the mom and dad come on the different types of therapy, what works, what doesn't work. Absolutely. And then there's, a controversial therapy that ends up working, right, with a lot of practice, repetition. And so, with our kids, communication comes in such different, diverse ways, absolutely. That it could be through an iPad, it could be through a picture board, it could be through stenciling, which is this kind of concept we talk about in the book. But I love it because it's one of the things that our families, when we ask them, when we talk about Angelman syndrome and your kid, what do you hope most for? Usually the three things that come up is no more seizures, sleep. Please, God, give us sleep.
But this sleep. We talk about sleep too.
We do. But the big thing is, I want him to have a voice. I want to be able to hear that my throat hurts, or and so I think it's really interesting in this book that you really navigate and go through, and with the twist of this mystery, right, of him being the one person that can say what happened, but he doesn't have a voice yet. And so I love that you wrap up this communication kind of challenge within this book and this story.
Yeah. The mystery is in a way a Trojan horse, because it allows me to sort of delve into all of these issues that I think are so interesting, and hopefully allow the readers to learn about things that they to really learn about things that they don't know in a way that's hopefully not didactic, or at least, I was going to say hopefully not didactic, but the fact of the matter is Mia can be kind of didactic, but but she's but in a well-meaning way, and but hopefully entertaining way too, so that people do learn. Because if it were just a treatise on all of these things, I don't think as many people would be reading it, quite honestly. And I do think that for this family, especially, I think it just, one of the big frustrations, they are a family who are very verbal. The mom is a linguistics PhD,
right, which was amazing.
Mia is hyperverbal, all of this stuff. And so for them to not be able to communicate with Eugene, not and just not even like the deep philosophical things, but even just very basic things, there's so much that goes on in our day-to-day communications that allow us to bond with each other. And to not have that with somebody that you love is just so frustrating for the family, and 400,000 times more frustrating for Eugene.
Yeah.
So that is one of the things that the dad is thinking about with respect to happiness. Like, yeah, maybe he is happy, and maybe being quote unquote typical means that he's more like Mia, who's surly and doesn't seem particularly happy, but she can express herself. He
Yeah.
cannot. And
Yeah.
that's huge, like that's at the center of what we think in our society think of as sort of central to being a person. And that's the other thing, is that um from my experience as an immigrant, and I also teach a bunch of non-speaking autistics, who are like everything from teenage to about 25 years old. I teach creative writing.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, and one in-person session and two virtual sessions that just ended for the summer. And one thing that I know from both my experience and hearing about their experiences is that it is just confounding our societal assumption that we have that equates oral fluency with intelligence. You talk fast using big words, we're like, oh, that must be a smart person. If you have any issues with speaking, stuttering, if you don't speak English very well because you're from a different country, even, any of those issues, or if you have apraxia or dyspraxia, if you have, any of these things, then you're considered not to be very intelligent. Even we know otherwise, even if like the mom here who's Korean and she has an accent, she has a PhD in linguistics. And yet, even Mia, who knows better, is like, yeah, sometimes I forget. Because she speaks like an immigrant. She speaks with, in this weird way. And sometimes I sort of think of her as not all that intelligent.
Well, I love that. It's such an important message that you bring that up. And I think you also talk about this idea, and I think Mia and John and the mom start really noticing this towards the end and pushing this, is this whole idea of presuming competence.
Yes.
Like I constantly doubt Jackson in some ways, right? Of like, oh, well, he's just not able to do that. And instead of saying, like, let's presume competence here. And let's, like you said, even though there might be some sort of impediment, it does not equate to like intelligence. And I think that's such an important theme, and something that our community really fights for, even within our school districts, right? Of like, let's presume competence here. Let's not just put him in a mold that you have, that, because he doesn't do this, he can't do this.
Yes, exactly. And maybe if you say point to the sun and they don't point to the sun, maybe it's a motor difficulty.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're just bored and
they don't want to do it
and frustrated and saying F you.
Yep. Yes.
When I know so much more than this. And
I always look at Jackson and I'm like, you're totally telling me to shut up right now. I know you and he's just done, right?
Exactly. And that is the thing, is that we just think of anything that is related to communication and words, verbal. We think of that as a cognitive thing rather than as a motor thing or something else. And, and this thing is huge. Like, that's why Mia has this whole thing in the book about nonverbal is not the same as non-speaking. Just because you can't speak doesn't mean you're quote unquote nonverbal. Nonverbal means you don't have words. No, you might have words. You just can't say them or express them out loud.
It's such an important message, Angie. I can't even tell you, like I said, I could talk to you for hours, but for everyone who's listening now, especially our community, our parents, this book is fantastic. I think you will find yourself somewhere in this book relating in such a way of, that's me, or that's my son, or whatever. And so I want to say, for those of you that are listening, we are going to be doing our first ever book club through the Angelman Syndrome Foundation. And what we're going to do is we'll send out details very soon here. But for the first 25 people that sign up, you will be lucky to receive a free book from us to be able to jump right in and dive in and start reading. I heard a rumor that Angie is going to be willing to join our book club session.
Definitely.
We're really excited about that. I'm sure our families will have a lot of questions and a lot of conversation around this book. Like I said, just all the themes that are in it. I'm just so thankful that you're giving us as a community a voice. And, we talked a little bit before we jumped on and pressed record was how cool this will be also for those people who are reading this book that may not know Angelman, will be exposed to Angelman, but also the challenge of getting diagnosis. You've struggled with it with your own children.
Absolutely.
That there could be someone out there that reads this and says, those are signs of my child. Maybe I need to look into Angelman.
Absolutely. Or even pediatricians, who might consider this as part of the things that they consider with some early signs and things like that. So I think that kind of thing is huge. And I'm so grateful to this community. And I just wanted to say one quick word about research that I was able to do. This community rocks. I mean, I feel like Erin Sheldon, whom I know was one. She spent so much time with me, helping me to understand so many things. She actually was a beta reader for me. So she was an early reader.
Oh, that's awesome.
And she gave me feedback and she made some suggestions. And there are some other parents that are in my acknowledgements who were also served as beta readers and actually suggested maybe that a mosaic, because he doesn't have
higher function,
things like that. Yeah, all of that sort of stuff. And so I'm so grateful. And I was able to meet some of the parents. I actually went to someone in the Virginia area. I mean, so I don't want to name all their names because I don't want to embarrass them, but they're all in the acknowledgement. So you'll see. But and also Dr. Lynn Bird.
Yes.
Who I'm sure she was so helpful.
She's great. She's like the so for those of you that are listening that may not know, Erin Sheldon, we tend to think is like our communication guru. Yeah. She wrote the communication training series that we have on the Angelman Syndrome Foundation's website. So if you're listening and want to know more about the communication training, go to our website. And Dr. Lynn Bird runs the natural history study with Dr. Win Han, but also runs and supports our Angelman Syndrome Foundation clinic in San Diego. So you talked to the right people. You did your research, which us as a community are so thankful for that because that's such an important part of it.
Thank you so much. And I really want to meet more of you.
Yes.
So people who are listening, please come to my website, which is angiekimbooks.com. And if you click on events, you'll see that I'm doing, I think it's like 25 different cities in the US or something like that I'm coming to. So if you see any of that, please come if you can. There are some virtual events, or you can DM me or, message me or whatever, or email me. My email is on there too. And just let me know if you're coming, because I would love to meet you. And
so you're going to get bombarded now. So just be prepared.
Great.
And hopefully I'll get to meet you in one of those. So we'll have to go. We'll make sure to put that website in on our social post with this podcast. And just so you guys, those of you who are listening, the book comes out. You can get it on August 29th, but you can go ahead and pre-order it now. You can get it in book form. You can get it in I think Kindle form, you can get it in audio, but you can get all types of forms in this book. And like I said, stay tuned for details on the book club. Angie, this won't be the last time we will talk. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. And we look forward to sharing this book with our community. And then we'll look forward to the next one.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited. And this was such a pleasure and such a privilege. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. And for those of you that are listening, stay tuned for our next podcast coming soon. We'll get more details for you, but thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the ASF podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support us, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating or review. And please don't forget to subscribe.